When you choose to stay silent, it does more than just remove words from a conversation. It creates an undeniable space, a void that the other person can't help but notice. Silence is not just the absence of noise, it's a powerful force that demands reflection. When you stop talking, stop explaining, stop trying to make someone see your worth, the quiet suddenly becomes louder than anything you could ever say. That space you create forces the other person to face themselves, their actions, and the reality of what life feels like without your presence constantly filling the gaps. It's in that space that people begin to truly notice what's been lost, and oftentimes that realization comes much stronger than if you had tried to spell it out in words. Think about it. When you're always present, always explaining, always reminding someone of what they should appreciate, they never really have to stop and think for themselves. Your presence makes it easy for them to take things for granted, but silence removes that safety net. Suddenly they don't have your voice to lean on, your energy to rely on, or your effort to balance out their lack of it. And when that silence stretches out, it naturally forces them to look inward and ask themselves, why is this person no longer trying? Why are they no longer reaching out? Did I do something to push them away? That reflection is uncomfortable, but it's necessary, and it only comes when you decide to step back and stop filling every gap with words. Silence is also a mirror. It reflects to the other person the way they've been showing up or failing to show up in your connection. If they've been distant, dismissive, or careless, your silence highlights those actions in a way that words never could. And in that mirror, they're confronted with the truth that relationships require effort on both sides. And if they're not putting in their share, they risk losing what they thought they could always count on. This sudden awareness can stir feelings of regret, guilt, or even longing because they start to realize just how much they had and how easily they overlooked it. But here's the beauty of it. Silence isn't about punishment or manipulation. It's about respect, self-respect. When you choose silence, you're not chasing, you're not begging, you're not over-explaining. You're simply showing that you value yourself enough to stop pouring energy into someone who isn't meeting you halfway. That act of stepping back creates a shift, and often that's the very moment when the other person wakes up to what you truly mean to them. So while it may feel difficult, while the silence may feel heavy at first, remember that it has a purpose. It creates space for the other person to reflect, to realize, and to recognize your worth in a way they never would if you kept filling every moment with words. And that silence may end up saying everything you ever wanted them to hear. When you stay silent for too long, one of the most profound things that happens is the shift in power within the dynamic. Words are often used to chase, to convince, to explain, to justify, but silence removes all of that. It communicates without explanation. It says, I don't need to fight for your attention. I don't need to prove my value. And I don't need to keep showing up when you're not doing the same. This quiet strength makes the other person start to feel the absence of your effort. And that absence can hit harder than anything else. When you are always available, always the one reaching out, always the one smoothing over problems, the balance tips heavily against you. It makes the other person comfortable in doing less because they know you will fill the gap. But silence takes that away. Suddenly they can no longer rely on you to fix the distance or to bridge the silence. They're forced to confront the discomfort of their own lack of effort. And in that moment, they realize just how much power you truly had in the relationship, not because you forced it, but because your consistency gave them a sense of security they no longer feel. Silence also changes the way they see you. When you stop chasing, when you stop over-explaining, when you step back and let the quiet do the work, it shifts their perception. Instead of being seen as desperate or overly invested, You're seen as someone with self-restraint, someone who values themselves enough not to beg for love or attention. That kind of strength is magnetic. It triggers curiosity, sometimes even panic, because the human mind naturally wants what it feels it's losing. Silence becomes the spark that reignites their interest, because suddenly they have questions that only you can answer, but you're no longer rushing to provide those answers. This is why silence is so powerful. It forces the other person to move toward you if they want clarity, resolution, or connection. By refusing to fill the void, you create a natural pull. They start to replay moments in their head, analyze your behavior, and wonder why things changed. That curiosity can quickly grow into longing, and longing often brings them back in ways that words never could. But here's the important part. Silence only works when it's rooted in strength, not manipulation. You're not staying silent to play games. You're staying silent because you've decided to stop giving your energy to someone who isn't matching it. That authenticity is what makes the silence so powerful, because it communicates self-respect. So when you stay silent for too long, the balance shifts, the power dynamic changes, and the other person begins to feel your absence as a presence they can't ignore. And in that quiet, they realize the weight of what they stand to lose. When you stay silent for too long, something very interesting happens. You create a space where assumptions begin to take over. Human nature despises uncertainty. When someone is used to hearing from you, to your presence filling the room, to your attention giving them comfort, and then suddenly that is removed, their mind starts racing. Silence makes them wonder what you're doing, who you're with, and why you're no longer giving them the energy they had grown accustomed to. It unsettles them because people often assume attention is guaranteed until it disappears. And when it disappears, it sparks a level of curiosity and even fear that words could never create. Their quietness becomes louder than anything you could ever say. Every text you don't send, every call you don't make, every moment you don't step in to explain yourself becomes fuel for their imagination. They may begin thinking you've moved on, that you no longer care, or that someone else has taken your attention. And whether or not those things are true, the mere thought of them is powerful enough to create an emotional reaction. In many cases, this silent space leaves them missing you far more than if you had been trying to explain yourself or prove your worth. This is why silence is so effective. It hands the responsibility back to them. If they truly care, the gap you've created becomes unbearable. They'll start to feel the absence, and that absence weighs more heavily than your presence ever did. They realize the effort has to come from their side now, because you've stopped carrying the relationship on your shoulders. Silence forces them to feel the imbalance that they may have ignored when you were compensating. The longer the silence stretches, the more they notice the difference between how things used to be and how they are now. That contrast can make them appreciate what you once gave, because it highlights the comfort they lost. And appreciation often comes too late, once the silence has already done its work. This is why silence isn't just about withdrawing. It's about allowing the other person to feel the consequences of their own behavior. It's about giving them the space to reflect without your constant presence shielding them from reality. At the same time, silence strengthens you. It allows you to detach, to regain perspective, to see things clearly without being caught up in constant noise. It reminds you that your peace doesn't depend on someone else's attention. And when they realize that, when they see you no longer chasing or begging, it shakes their perception of you. Suddenly, you're not the one needing validation. You've become the one they need to figure out again. So when you stay silent for too long, the imagination of the other person becomes your greatest ally. They fill in the blanks with thoughts that haunt them. And in that haunting, they realize just how much your presence once meant. When you stay silent for too long, another powerful shift occurs. It exposes their dependence on your energy. People often don't realize how much they rely on your presence, your words, and your reassurance until it's no longer there. When you're constantly available, they may take it for granted, assuming you'll always be there to comfort, support, or validate them. But when silence enters the picture, it highlights just how much of their emotional stability was connected to your communication. Suddenly, they're left to face the void. And that void is often uncomfortable, sometimes even painful, because it reminds them of how much they had been leaning on you without acknowledgement. Silence creates a mirror. It reflects the truth back to them, not through confrontation or arguments, but through absence. They begin to see that your attention wasn't just a background detail, it was something that gave them a sense of value and importance. And when that disappears, they feel the emptiness inside themselves. This isn't just about missing your words or your presence. It's about realizing how much of their identity was tied to knowing you were there. The quietness makes them confront questions they may have avoided. Why do I feel this unsettled? Why do I miss them so much? Why does their silence bother me more than anything they've ever said? In many ways, your silence creates the contrast they need to truly understand your worth. Think about it. When you were always reaching out, always filling the silence with effort, they never had to question your role in their life. You were predictable, constant, dependable. But when you step back, they feel that gap, and it forces them to measure the difference between life with you and life without you. That comparison often tilts heavily in your favor because they begin to see how much brighter, fuller, and steadier things felt when your voice and presence were part of their daily life. It also brings up something else. Silence teaches them about their own weaknesses. If they struggle to sit in the stillness without you, it reveals their lack of emotional independence. They may try to distract themselves, but distractions can only go so far. In quiet moments, late at night, or during vulnerable times, your absence echoes. It reminds them that while they may have thought they were fine without you, the reality tells a different story. And that realization can stir a longing that grows stronger the longer you stay silent. At the same time, silence protects you. It stops you from over-explaining, from trying to prove yourself, from giving away energy that isn't being valued. Instead, you redirect that energy back to yourself, allowing you to heal, grow, and stand stronger. The beauty of this dynamic is that as you become more self-reliant and peaceful, they become more unsettled and reflective. Your silence becomes the teacher, and they are left with the uncomfortable lesson of realizing just how much they depended on you all along. That's why silence isn't weakness, it's a powerful reminder that your energy was never free to take for granted. When you stay silent for too long, it also forces people to question their own behavior and choices. Silence has a way of removing the noise, the back and forth, and the excuses that often cloud situations. When you no longer respond, when you no longer argue, when you no longer try to explain yourself or convince them, they are left alone with their thoughts. And in that quiet, the mind naturally begins to reflect. It's in those moments they start replaying their actions, wondering where things shifted, and questioning whether their behavior pushed you away. Your silence becomes the space that makes them think deeper than your words ever could. Most of the time, people don't take accountability when they are confronted directly. If you tell them what they did wrong, they may defend themselves, argue, or dismiss your feelings. But when you're silent, there's no confrontation to push against. Instead, they face only themselves. The absence of your voice forces their own inner voice to get louder. And often that voice doesn't let them rest easily. It asks them uncomfortable questions. Did I hurt them? Did I ignore something important? Was I selfish? Silence turns into a mirror of self-awareness. and they can't escape it no matter how hard they try. And here's the irony. The more they try to run from the discomfort, the stronger it grows. They may distract themselves with work, friends, or even other people. But deep down, the silence keeps tugging at them. The lack of closure, the lack of explanation creates a kind of pressure they can't easily relieve. Humans are wired to seek resolution, to close the loop, but silence leaves the loop open. And when they realize you're not rushing to fix things, they're the ones who begin to feel the weight of repairing what's broken. And this is where guilt and regret often come in. Without your voice to soften the blow or give them reassurance, they have to face the raw truth of their own actions. They begin to wonder if they underestimated your value, if they took you for granted, if they let their ego get in the way. Silence doesn't just highlight your strength, it highlights their mistakes. And that realization can cut deeper than any words you could have spoken. For you, this works in your favor. By not explaining, by not justifying, you maintain your power. You allow them to do the work of questioning and reflecting. You don't need to convince anyone of your worth because your silence already proves it. And in time, that silence becomes the very thing that makes them see what they lost and pushes them toward change. That's why silence isn't just absence, it's an invitation for accountability. When you stay silent for too long, people also begin to feel the emptiness of your absence in ways they didn't expect. At first, they might convince themselves that your silence means nothing, that they can live without your presence, that they don't need your energy around them. But time has a way of breaking down those defenses. The longer the silence lasts, the more noticeable the void becomes. They realize that the moments, the laughter, the conversations, the reassurance you once gave are no longer there. And it's in that void that they start to feel the ache of missing you. Silence magnifies absence in a way that words never could. Your silence can become a haunting reminder of what once existed. Every place you used to be together, every routine you once shared, every memory you left behind becomes louder in your absence. It's almost paradoxical. The less you do, the more they feel. Silence echoes in the spaces where your voice used to fill the air, and it becomes impossible for them to ignore the impact you had. Instead of being taken for granted, your value grows with each passing day of quiet. There's also a psychological trigger in this. People naturally desire what is no longer easily accessible. When you step back and stop giving them your energy, you shift from being ordinary to being scarce. Scarcity always increases value. Just like in life, when something rare is gone, people start realizing its importance. Your silence makes you rare. Your silence makes you precious. It transforms you from someone they could reach at any time into someone whose presence feels like a privilege rather than a guarantee. That shift alone can change how deeply they start to miss you. But here's the deeper truth. Your silence also forces them to confront whether or not they deserve you. If you had kept speaking, kept explaining, kept trying to fix things, they might have continued taking advantage of your efforts. But when you withhold that, they are left with the raw reality of their actions and the silence that follows. This not only makes them miss you, it makes them reevaluate themselves. They start questioning whether they treated you right, whether they honored your presence, whether they pushed you away through their own choices. And as the days turn into weeks, the silence becomes heavier. What once felt like control on their end starts to feel like loss. They recognize that they can't just snap their fingers and have your presence back, and that realization creates a kind of longing, even desperation. The silence becomes louder than words, echoing in their mind, and reminding them of the depth of what they had with you. In the end, staying silent for too long doesn't just protect your peace. It becomes the very thing that makes them miss you, respect you, and often come running back to you.